Hours after the Houston Texans defeated the Colts in Week 18, Lovie Smith was fired after one season as the Texans head coach. Houston went 3-13-1 and struggled, to say the least. The Texans have now fired back-to-back coaches after one season. Houston axed David Culley last January after a 4-13 season. General manager Nick Cassero now has to hire a new head coach for the third straight offseason. Houston has a lot of issues, and Davis Mills does not appear to be the long-term solution at quarterback. It feels like both David Culley and Lovie Smith were put in a horrible situation and not given much of a chance to succeed. The Houston Texans aren't making any progress towards the future and just continue to be a complete disaster. The Houston Texans only had 3 different head coaches through their first 18 years as a franchise. Dom Capers was hired when Houston expanded into the league in 2002. He only lasted 4 seasons and never finished with a winning record. The Texans hired Gary Kubiak in 2006, and he coached the Texans for 8 seasons. He took Houston to the playoffs twice, and the Texans beat the Bengals in the wildcard round both times before losing in the divisional round. Kubiak was fired in 2013 after the Texans lost 11 straight and Wade Phillips was named the interim. Kubiak went on to coach the Broncos to a Super Bowl victory, and the Texans decided to hire Bill O'Brien. O'Brien coached the Texans for 7 seasons and did have a lot of success. Houston made the postseason 4 times and won in the wild card twice. O'Brien was appointed the general manager in 2020, and everything fell apart fast. He made a very questionable move trading DeAndre Hopkins and didn't even get a first-round pick back. Houston started that next season 0-4, and he was fired. Romeo Crennel took over as the interim. That offseason, the Texans hired David Culley just to fire him a season later, and did the same with Lovie Smith, who has actually had a very successful coaching career. Lovie Smith played linebacker and defensive back at Tulsa, where he was a 2-time All-American. He immediately started coaching after his graduation, and he was hired as the defensive coordinator at his alma mater, Big Sandy High School, where Lovie won 3 straight state titles and was All-State 3 times. Lovie made the jump to college in 1983 when he became the linebackers coach at Tulsa. He was a positional coach at the college level for over a decade at a multitude of Power 5 schools before he finally made the jump to the pros. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers hired Lovie Smith to be their linebackers coach in 1996. Under Tony Dungy, Lovie helped develop the Tampa 2 defense. He stayed in Tampa Bay until 2001 when he became the defensive coordinator for the St. Louis Rams. He completely flipped around the Rams defense, and St. Louis made the Super Bowl in 2001 but lost to the Patriots. Lovie Smith was hired to be the head coach of the Chicago Bears in 2004. He was the Bears head coach for 9 years. Chicago had a winning record in 5 of those seasons and made the NFC Championship twice. Chicago made it all the way to the Super Bowl in 2006 but fell to the Colts. Lovie finished his tenure in Chicago 81-63. He was fired after the 2012 season and was hired in 2014 to be the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay struggled and went just 8-24 over 2 seasons. Lovie ended up taking the head coach job at Illinois and struggled. The Fighting Illini made a single bowl and never had a winning record under Lovie. Lovie Smith was the defensive coordinator for the Houston Texans under David Culley in 2021, and after Culley was fired, Lovie Smith was named the next head coach. The Texans were awful. Houston went 3-13-1, and Lovie was fired after a single season. Lovie Smith definitely took something with him from Houston, the first overall pick. Going into Week 18, the Houston Texans were the worst team in football and well on their way to having the first overall pick at the 2023 NFL Draft. Houston was 2-13-1, but the Bears came into Sunday 3-14. If the Texans beat the Colts and the Vikings beat the Bears, Chicago would have stolen the first overall pick, and that's exactly what happened in dramatic fashion. The Bears lost 29-13. That wasn't in question, but Indianapolis almost won. The Colts led 31-24 with less than a minute remaining. The Texans faced a long 4th and 20 with the game on the line. Davis Mills managed to find Jordan Akins in the end zone for a touchdown, and Houston opted to go for 2 and got it to win the game and fall back to the second pick at the draft. Davis Mills doesn't care about a potential first overall pick that was surely going to be his replacement. Lovie Smith may have known that he was already 1 foot out the door. Davis Mills will never have to buy a drink in Chicago, and the Bears can now ask for a king's ransom for that first overall pick that will likely be Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. The Texans need to either try to move up one spot to ensure they get the guy they want, or have to settle for the second best quarterback off the board. The future of the Houston Texans is very bleak, and one of the most important questions to ask is what happens to Davis Mills? The Houston Texans selected Davis Mills in the 3rd round of the 2021 NFL Draft. Deshaun Watson was inactive his rookie season, and Mills was the 2nd string behind Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod suffered a hamstring injury in week 2, and Davis Mills stepped in. Houston was 2-9 in games he started. Mills passed for 2,700 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Mills was named the starter for the 2022 season and ended up going 3-11-1 in his starts. He threw for 3,100 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions, tying Dak Prescott for the most in the league. He has been fine for a placeholder that the Texans desperately needed, but it's no question that Houston is better off going in a different route at the 2023 draft to find a franchise quarterback. Unfortunately, that leaves Mills on the bench or starting until the rookie is ready to play. There are not many positives for the Houston Texans, but Dameon Pierce is one of them. The Houston Texans took Dameon Pierce in the 4th round of the 2022 NFL Draft. Pierce had good numbers in 4 years at Florida. He got plenty of playing time from the jump in Houston as a rookie and broke out. Pierce suffered an ankle injury in week 14 that landed him on injured reserve, but before he went down, Pierce recorded 900 yards and 4 touchdowns. Brandon Cooks has been the top receiving weapon in Houston. He's a veteran presence, and he led the team in receiving with 700 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's also possible we see John Mechie return to the field. Houston selected him in the 2nd round this past offseason, but he was diagnosed with leukemia. But all signs are pointing to a healthy return. I'm not quite sure where the Houston Texans go from here as a franchise. It feels like this is a franchise completely without a plan. Bill O'Brien had something good going, and for whatever reason, he traded DeAndre Hopkins, and Deshaun Watson found himself in legal trouble. Those 2 things I would consider the 2 biggest that have contributed to the complete collapse of the Texans. David Culley was clearly used as a scapegoat, and the same goes for Lovie Smith now. I'm not sure if the Texans feel like they can get a better head coach in the offseason or what, but the Texans' job is probably the worst that's available. The only thing that may make it better is the chance to start off with a good young quarterback like Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. It really is a shame that Houston lost the 1st overall pick to the Bears, because that could have ended up being a franchise-altering selection. It still can be. I would assume that Bryce Young ends up going 1st if things stay the way they are now, but it's the NFL draft, and that isn't what happens. His size is going to concern teams, and they may back off, and CJ Stroud or Will Levis magically jump up to the top of teams' draft boards. There is always the chance that the Bears decide to take the best player available, and the Texans get their choice at whatever quarterback they want. The draft is going to be huge for Houston this offseason, but the Texans still have a lot of rebuilding to do.